In this series of short videos, we'll explore how to use Photoshop compositing techniques to create a multi-layered image of a dreamlike ocean scene. We'll be using layers, layer masks, smart objects, and blending techniques to build this composite from the ground up. The first step in creating a composite is to add a new image. I already have a couple of images open in Photoshop, and I want to add a more colorful sky to the shot of the pier. I'll go over to a photo of the sunset sky, and I'll select the entire image. Then I'll copy that and go back over to the main image of the pier and paste, which adds the sunset sky as a new layer. In the Layers panel, I'll double-click on the layer name and rename it Sunset Sky. I want to be able to see both the new sky layer and the background image at the same time. So I'll get the Move tool in the Tools panel, then click Opacity at the top of the Layers panel, and lower the opacity of the sunset layer. I'll move the new sky layer up until the horizon line on that layer is just a bit below the horizon line on the underlying pier image. Then I'll set the layer opacity slider back to 100%. Next, I want to hide the lower part of the sunset sky layer so that we can see the pier and the ocean in the background image. I'll do that with a layer mask, which is a tool that you'll use often in your own composites. I'll click the Add Layer Mask button at the bottom of the Layers panel to add a layer mask to the active layer. I'll choose the Gradient tool in the Tools panel, and in the Options bar for this tool, I'll open the Gradient Picker, and I'll choose the third gradient swatch from the left, which is a black to white gradient. I'll leave the rest of the options set to the defaults. With the Gradient tool, I'll click right at the horizon of the sunset sky layer and drag upwards just a bit. When I release the mouse, the gradient is added to the layer mask, creating a convincing blend for the new sky. To understand how a layer mask works, notice the gradient on the layer mask thumbnail. The black part of the gradient is hiding the sunset sky layer so that you can see down through that area to the image of the pier below, and the white part of the gradient shows the sunset sky layer. The Gradient tool created shades of gray in between black and white, which creates a gradual transition from the pier image to the sunset sky. Next, we'll add an element to the pier that will enhance the story of this image. This time, I'll use another method to add an image, File, Place. This method creates a Smart Object layer, which will allow me to resize and reshape the new image multiple times without compromising its quality. To do this, I'll choose File, Place Embedded. In my folder of source images, I'll choose north.jpg and click Place. The file is added with a bounding box around it, which you can use to scale or transform the layer if needed. First, I'll go to the Layers panel, and I'll change the blending mode of the layer to Overlay, since that's what we'll use to blend this image into the pier. To scale the image smaller, I'll hold down Shift and drag inward on the handle in the upper right corner. The Shift key preserves the proportions of the original photo. If I add in the Option or Alt key, it will transform from the center point. There, that looks about right. I'll click the checkmark in the Options bar to apply that transformation. This symbol on the New Place layer means that this is a smart object. You can resize and transform a smart object as many times as you like without harming the image. Next, I'll apply some perspective transformations to this layer. I'll choose Edit, Transform, Distort. And I'll drag on the top right corner handle and place it close to the top right corner of the pier. I'll do the same with the top left corner handle. I'll work with some of the other handles to fine-tune the transformation so it looks as if this element is really part of the pier. To apply the transformation, I'll click the checkmark button in the Options bar. There are still some edges showing on the north layer, so I'll hide them using another layer mask. I'll click the Add Layer Mask button at the bottom of the Layers panel, and then I'll get the Brush tool. I'll press X to exchange my colors so that black is in the foreground color swatch. And then I'll paint with black on the layer mask to hide the obvious edges of the north layer. Now you know some of the basic steps for creating a composite: how to add images, transform an added image, and use layer masks and blend modes to blend them together. Now it's time to add one of the central elements of the composite, using selections and layer masks to blend it into the scene. I'll choose File, Place Embedded, and I'll choose the door.jpg file, and then click Place. In the Layers panel, I'll lower the opacity a bit so I can see through the door when I resize it. I'll hold down Shift and drag inward on a corner handle to scale it smaller. I'll then click the checkmark to apply the transformation. Next, I'll position the door so that the top of the door handle is just under the horizon. I'll drag on the door to position it so it's centered in relation to the far edge of the pier. Then I'll return the layer opacity back to 100%. I want to hide the red bricks so we just see the white areas of the column and the arched entryway. I'll use the Quick Selection tool to make a selection of the red brick areas. I'll click on the bricks with the tool and then continue to click and drag over additional areas to add them to the selection. I added a bit too much to the selection here, so I'll Option or Alt drag over that part to subtract it from the selection. Next, I'll tap on the left bracket key a few times to make my brush size smaller, and I'll click in the narrow area between the columns and the arched entryway. I'll continue clicking on these inner bricks to add them to the selection. Next, I'll add a layer mask that hides the selected area. To do this, I'll hold the Option or Alt key as I click on the Add Layer Mask button at the bottom of the Layers panel. This automatically fills the selected area of the mask with black. Now I need to hide the actual door. I'll switch to the rectangular marquee tool, and I'll double check that there's no feather value applied in the options bar. I'll position my cursor at the top left corner of the door and drag diagonally down to the right to define a selection of the door that overlaps just a bit onto the white areas. With my selection tool still active, I can click inside the selection and move it upwards. If I press the Shift key after I start dragging the selection, it will constrain the motion vertically. I want to move this selection up to the point where the arch above begins to noticeably curve inward. Next, I need to add on to my current selection to include the arched window. I'll switch to the elliptical marquee tool. I'll select the Add To selection icon in the options bar to tell Photoshop to add to the current selection. I'll click near the upper left part of the arched window and drag out an elliptical selection. As I make the ellipse larger, I can temporarily interrupt the selection by pressing the space bar while still holding the mouse button down. This allows me to drag to reposition the selection and align it so it fits better to the actual shape of the arch. I'll release the spacebar with my mouse still held down to return to dragging out the selection. There, that looks pretty good. I'll release the mouse button to finish the selection. I can use this selection to add black to the layer mask and hide the selected areas. In the Layers panel, I'll click on the layer mask thumbnail for the door layer to make sure that it's active. Black is currently my foreground color, so I'll use the shortcut of Option Delete on Mac or Alt Backspace on Windows to fill the selection with black. If you look at the layer mask thumbnail, you can see that this area has been filled with black, which hides that part of the door layer. I don't need the selection anymore, so I'll choose Select, Deselect. Now I need to mask out the bottom part of the door below the horizon. I'll switch to the Brush tool. I'll click on the Brush menu in the options bar to set the hardness to about 50%. I'll keep the brush size fairly large. I'll position my brush on the left side of the door with the top edge of the circular brush cursor right on the horizon. I'll click once and release the mouse button. Then move the brush cursor to the right side of the door, position the top edge of the brush on the horizon line, and shift-click to draw a straight line between the two clicks. Now I'll quickly brush over the rest of the door down below to mask it out. Using selections and the brush tool, as I've done here, are common ways to modify layer masks so that they reveal only the areas you want to see on a layer. With the addition of the doorway in the distance, our composite is now well on the way to becoming a more fantastical scene. Let's add some new elements to make it even more dreamlike and surreal. Along the way, we'll explore some more layer masking and use the Blend If sliders for a masking effect. I'll choose File, Place Embedded, select the Clouds for Pier.jpg file, and then click Place. I'll lower the opacity a bit so I can see the clouds in relation to the underlying layers. I'll drag the layer down a bit until the center pillar of clouds is arranged within the arched opening of the doorway. I'll press Enter or click the checkmark button in the options bar to place the layer. Then I'll return the layer opacity to 100%. I only want some of the clouds to show up around the pier, and a layer mask will allow me to create this effect. I'll start with a layer mask that hides the entire layer and then use the brush tool to reveal the clouds where I want to see them. I can add a layer mask that's filled with black to hide the Clouds for Pier layer by Option or Alt clicking the Add Layer Mask button at the bottom of the Layers panel. Next, I'll go to the Tools panel and make the Brush tool active. I'll tap the right bracket key a few times to make my brush size larger. And I'll also make sure that white is my foreground color. In the Options bar, I'll make sure that the opacity is set to 100%. I'll use a large, soft edge brush and paint on the layer mask with white on either side of the pier to reveal the clouds. I'll tap the left bracket key to make the brush size a bit smaller and add in some clouds at the end of the pier. Then I'll press X to exchange the colors so that the foreground color is black. In the Options bar, I'll lower the brush opacity to 30%, and then paint on the mask to gradually hide parts of the layer where I don't want the clouds to show. With this type of masking, there can be a lot of back and forth with the brush tool until you get it looking the way you want. The great thing about working with layer masks is that the process is very flexible. Nothing on the image layer is ever deleted, and you can always modify the mask to refine the blending effect further. Now we'll add another important part of the story. I'll choose File, Place Embedded, and choose the sailboat.jpg image, and click Place. For this element, I'm not going to resize it, so I'll just press Enter to place the sailboat image. I want to hide the empty gray sky area around the boat, and to do this, we'll use a technique that's different from a layer mask. I'll go to the main layer menu, and I'll choose Layer Style, Blending Options. Near the bottom of the Layer Style dialog are the Blend If sliders. These allow you to show or hide parts of a layer based on their brightness value. To hide the lighter parts of the sailboat layer, I'll move the highlight slider for this layer towards the left until the number on the right above the slider shows about 135. This hides the pixels on the boat layer that are brighter than level 135, such as the lighter areas around the sailboat, letting the underlying layers show through. Next, I'll Option or Alt-click on the right half of the slider to split it apart, and I'll bring that half back to the right to about 170. This creates a more gradual transition between what is being shown and hidden on the layer. The numbers mean that any tonal value brighter than 170 will be hidden on the layer. Then there will be a gradual transition to level 135, and any tonal value below that level will be visible. I like to think of the Blend If sliders as masking without a mask. In some situations, they can be highly useful compositing tools. I'll click OK to apply that effect. The boat is now blended very well, but there are some minor touch-ups on the outer parts of the boat layer that will require a simple layer mask. I'll add a layer mask, press X to switch the foreground color to black, and then use a soft edge brush tool to paint with black to hide the edges of the layer. I'll use the Move tool to reposition the boat layer so it's centered in relation to the pier and the doorway. Adding the sailboat to the composite helps to build the story of the scene that we're creating, and the billowy clouds around the pier are another step to draw the image away from reality and closer to a dreamlike world.